Welcome to this inaugural episode of Out from the Horrorbox. Here we take a look at horror movies ranging from old to new, from good to bad, whatever. Everything in between. And on today's episode, we're going to be talking about the 2019 horror film directed by Andre Overdahl, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark.
Some people believe if we repeat stories often enough, they become real. They make us who we are. That can be scary.
Eat it, Harold.
Do you want to see a haunted house?
Some kids went missing, so they boarded it up.
Okay, we saw it. Should we go now?
Who ordered the chicken?
What's that?
It's a book of scary stories. Tell me a story. Hey, what's going on?
Tommy's missing.
Tommy's name was in the book. There's no way it's actually connected, right? Okay, what if what happens in the book is exactly what's happened for real? Oh my god. Augie!
Stella!
Listen, you're in the next story. We're reading it right here.
It's a corpse looking for her missing toe.
I'm afraid that we woke something up.
You shouldn't have taken the book.
We've got to stop it.
Sarah Bellows' book, where the stories write themselves and it all comes alive.
The jangling man is coming.
On Halloween 1968, in the small town of Mill Valley, Pennsylvania, three teen friends, Stella, Augie, and Chuck, pranked the bully Tommy Milner. When Tommy and his gang chase them in retaliation, the trio flees to a drive-in movie theater, where a young drifter named Ramon hides them in his car. They invite Ramon to explore a local haunted house that once belonged to the wealthy Bellows family, who helped found Mill Valley. Inside, they find a book of horror stories written by Sarah Bellows, the Bellows' young daughter who was accused of witchcraft when the town's children mysteriously began to die and allegedly committed suicide. Having followed the group, Tommy locks them inside along with Ruth, Chuck's sister. They escape and Stella takes Sarah's book. Back home, Stella flips through the book, discovering that a new story entitled Harold has appeared on a page that was blank moments before. Meanwhile, in a nearby cornfield, an inebriated Tommy is stalked by the titular Harold, his family's scarecrow, after it comes to life. The creature stabs him with a pitchfork, causing Tommy to vomit hay and undergo a violent transformation. Tommy is later reported missing. Stella and Ramon find Harold dressed in Tommy's clothes. Stella is convinced that Tommy has been turned into a scarecrow. That night, a new story, The Big Toe, appears with Augie as the main character. The pair attempt to warn him about the monster, a corpse searching for its missing toe, which is inside a stew that Augie unwittingly eats. Augie disappears after the corpse drags him under his bed. Realizing they are next, the remaining friends attempt to destroy the book. When this proves impossible, they research Sarah's life in hopes of finding a solution. A new story, The Red Spot, is written. When Ruth discovers a swollen spider bite on her cheek, it explodes and releases hundreds of tiny spiders. Ruth is rescued but is traumatized. The group's investigation takes them to a local hospital where they discover that Sarah's brother performed electroshock therapy on her as part of a cover-up. The family's mill had been poisoning the town's water with mercury, leading to the deaths of the town's children, and Sarah was tortured by her family for trying to reveal the truth. To avoid suspicion, they blamed her for the deed. At the hospital, Chuck is attacked by the Pale Lady, a phantom from his recurring nightmares, who absorbs him. Stella and Ramon are arrested for trespassing by Police Chief Turner, who reveals that Ramon is a Vietnam War draft dodger. Ramon reveals to Stella that it was out of fear after his brother enlisted and his dead body was returned to them in pieces. Turner's dog begins to act strangely, and Ramon realizes that the next creature will be the Jangly Man, a monster from a campfire story that frightened him as a child. The Jangly Man kills Turner by breaking his neck before attempting to kill Ramon, and Ramon and Stella escape, and he lures the creature away with Turner's car while Stella goes to the Bellows house to put an end to Sarah's actions. The Jangly Man chases Ramon and ends up getting smashed against the grill of another car. Ramon gets out and runs to the Bellows house, where he hides from the Jangly Man under the floor. Meanwhile, Stella is taken back in time and hides under a table with the help of a young Lulu Baptiste, who's eventually found. Living out part of Sarah's experience of the torture her family put her through, Stella confronts Sarah's ghost and promises her that she will tell the real story of Sarah's life and the truth of her innocence if she stops harming people with her stories. Stella writes down the true story in blood before she, the Jangly Man, and all the previous monsters vanish. She writes the truth about Sarah's life in the papers to the town, keeping her promise, and Sarah moves on to the afterlife peacefully. Ramon accepts his enlistment and shares an emotional goodbye with Stella before he leaves for the war. Stella drives away with her father and a recovered Ruth, and states that she believes that they will find a way to rescue Chuck and Augie. Okay, so let's get into a little bit of background on this. So, on January 14th, it was announced, back in 2016, it was announced that Guillermo del Toro would develop the film, as well as direct. And that also would be produced by Sean Daniel, Jason Brown, and Elizabeth Grave, with Roberto Grande and Joshua Long executive producing. In February of 2016, CBS Films hired screenwriter brothers duo Dan and Kevin Hagman to polish the draft written by August. In December 2017, it was reported that Andre Overdahl would direct the film. The Hangmans received the final screenplay credit, with Del Toro, Patrick Melton, and Marcus Dunstan receiving story by credit. And I believe then that's when it was just going to be produced by Guillermo del Toro. In July 2019, at San Diego Comic-Con, Del Toro explained why Scary to Tell in the Dark was not produced as an anthology film. Del Toro stated, "When we started talking about this about 5 years ago, I had to think about it. Anthology films are always as bad as the worst story in them. They're never as good as the best story. I remembered in Pan's Labyrinth, I created a book called The Book of Crossroads. I thought it could be great if we had a book that reads you, and it writes what you're most afraid of. Then the theme became stories we tell each other." It was released theatrically in the United States on August 9, 2019 by CBS Films. Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark grossed $68.9 million in the United States and Canada and $3.6 million in other territories for a worldwide total of $104.5 million. Let's see, it went up against The Kitchen, Dora and the Lost City of Gold, The Art of Racing in the Rain, and Brian Banks. It was projected to gross $15 to $17 million from 3,000 theaters in its opening weekend. The film ended up making $8.8 million on its first day, including $2.33 million from Thursday night previews. It went on to debut to $20.8 million, finishing second behind holdover Hobbs and Shaw. It dropped 52% in the second weekend to $10.1 million, finishing fifth. But I mean, obviously, it kind of broke. It smashed its goal. obviously. Critical reception, Rotten Tomatoes gives it 78%, and that's based on 233 reviews. Um, and then Metacritic gave the film a weighted average score of 61 out of 100, based on 33 critics indicating generally favorable reviews. Cinema Score gave the film a grade of C, so it's out of A to F, or A plus to F scale. So overall, pretty favorable reviews. I'll say, it, it is a pretty good film for what it is. You can tell that it's not trying to be anything too gory or brutal. Something like a Friday the 13th or Halloween or anything like that. It's just trying to be something that's more like what the books are, and we'll get into the books in a little bit. But where it's meant as a way to get not kids, but more younger audiences into this realm of horror, into this world of you can watch, or you can talk about, or you can hear about these things that are a little bit more scary and more taboo, that we like to talk about, but and doing it in a way that they're able to watch it and they're able to see and understand that like these are things that are, yes, like outlandish, bordering on the realm of truth, but they're still able to understand that there's a line between what you can do that's horrifying and what you can do that's I just mean this as I feel like this is one that like you can show a child and they would get scared from the visuals, but then they'd understand that like, oh, like it's just a story. It's just something we tell each other, like as I said, the books. And yeah, so this movie is, like I said, it's pretty good. I love the direction is pretty good. I think I like the way that the way that they chose to do the story. That they didn't choose to do. I would like to maybe have done maybe an anthology, where each story gets its own little cinematic. But the way that they adapted it this way, I think actually works pretty well, and especially because it works to like further the story. You don't have to just have this one story, especially because you can tell like it was made to have a sequel. Because April 23rd of 2020, it was announced that a sequel was officially in development, and Overdahl returning to direct in Paramount Pictures, who that was taken into CBS Films. Basically, everybody's gonna reprise their roles. Guillermo del Toro is returning as producer, which is good. I'm glad he's sticking along with it, because I would hate for him to be like, oh, I'm like burnt out with this and I want to move on to a different project, which always, not always, but that happens, with someone who's a little bit more known, or when they get a little bit more known, or they want to distance themselves from, this and not be pegged as one thing. But I know Guillermo del Toro is known as more of like this monster kind of guy and like horror guy, but he's done a wide range of things. One thing I do like too about the film is that its setting, and like it makes you feel like, ooh, this is Halloween time. Like that beginning, it just gets you set for the mood of ooh, Halloween. And I love Halloween. Halloween's one of my favorite seasons of all time. Probably one of my favorite holidays. And you just feel it. I've never lived in like the Midwest, but you get this feeling of like, ooh, I know what it feels like. That chill in the air, and the fall leaves, and you're getting ready to get your costume on and go trick or treating. So there, atmospheric wise is amazing. Like you get this, especially in the hospital scene where the one kid, I think I think that's Chuck, when the pale lady's after him, and oh my god, just him like getting stuck in like that the hallway where it's like the perpendicular area, and it's just like he has nowhere to go. Everywhere he turns, she's there, and he's just stuck and gets absorbed, and it's just like the red lighting, and it's just amazing. And the way that they did Harold too, because like I said, I'm gonna get into the books, but Harold is one of my favorite. Is like probably my favorite story, and it's probably like one of the creepiest ones from that book. And I'm glad that they chose to adapt that. And then even like the big toe, I think that the whole scene is suspenseful, is so suspenseful, because like it's just building up to, and like you see the monster too, but even with that, like it's just like you know that there's nowhere to go. Like he's stuck in that house. There's nowhere for him to go, even going under the bed, and then it's there. It's just it gets him and it takes him to some place, and it's just like, man, it does get a little, slow towards the end. I think during the part where after you see the jangly man and he starts chasing them, but then when she gets into the house and gets back in time, it gets a little slow. But there is a scene earlier too in the movie when they first get in the house and they're looking around, and I think Chuck gets into the wardrobe and he's like gonna scare like whoever comes into the room, and he opens the wardrobe and he's taken back in time, and it's just such an effective scare, you know what I mean? Like, or like to pull that rug out from under you of what you think you're gonna expect what you think you're gonna expect when you get into the, like when he jumps out, like you think it's just gonna be, ooh, this creepy old house, but then it's like pristine and the warm lighting, and then there's just like the lady with the dog, and it's just so creepy. But yeah, this movie, I would honestly, like, if I were to rate it, like, I would give it, I would say I'd give it like 3 out of 5 stars, because it's like I said, it's pretty good. I like the way that they did the monsters. They look like they did from the book, especially because that the pictures from the book are terrifying unto themselves. The pictures from that book are terrifying, and that's honestly, I think, what makes the books like way better than they are. So actually, let's jump into that. So the history of Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark is that, so it's written by Alvin Schwartz. It is, well, it was originally illustrated by Stephen Gamble. There's 3 books. There's Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. That was released in 1981. More Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. That was released in 1984. And Scary Stories 3, More Tales to Chill Your Bones. And that was released in 91. The 3 books each feature numerous short stories in the horror genre. Alvin Schwartz drew heavily from folklore and urban legends as the topic of his stories, researching extensively and spending more than Alvin Schwartz drew heavily from folklore and urban legends as the topic of his stories, researching extensively and spending more than a year on writing each book. The first volume was published in 81 and whatever. As of 2017, the books have collectively sold more than 7 million copies and appeared on numerous children's bestseller lists. They have collectively been hailed as a cultural touchstone for a generation, with the original charcoal and ink artwork by Gamble often cited out for singled out for praise. They have also frequently been the subject of criticism from parents and social groups who consider them inappropriate for children. What I like too is that the movie. What I like too is that the movie didn't just draw from the first book. I mean, Harold isn't until I think the third. Yeah, the third book. Scary Stories, the More Tales to Chill Your Bones. And then I know that the Big Toe is in the first one. Mitai Dodi Walker is in the first one. That's what the Jangly Man says. I know the Jangly Man was made for the movie. Let's see, I think the Red Spot is that from the third one as well? Yeah, that's from the third one. And then the Dream, that's the one with the pale lady. I think that one's the first one as well. Or is it the second one? Oh no, that's the third one as well. So some controversy. So the series is listed by the American Library Association as being the most challenged series book from the 90s and the seventh most challenged from the 2000s. It again made the list in 2012. Complaints have typically centered on its violence, disturbing subject matter, and potential unsuitability for younger viewers. And potential unsuitability for younger readers, as well as religious concerns. Oh, always religious. Critics have called the stories, many of which feature macabre topics such as murder, disfigurement, and cannibalism. Critics have called the stories, many of which feature macabre topics such as murder, disfigurement, and cannibalism, sick, repulsive, and really disgusting, not appropriate for children. The nightmarish artwork by Stephen Gamble has also been a subject of criticism. Among the groups who have attempted to have the book removed from school libraries are local parent groups and Concerned Women for America. Defenders have included the American Library Association and the Bulletin of the Center for Children's Books. Defenders of the books have claimed that they are aimed at middle school kids who are perfectly able to cope with this kind of thing. The stories help children deal with reality of putting faces on what they're afraid of, which is true. I wholeheartedly agree with. I believe that, I think that you're right. Maybe there are some people who aren't ready at a certain age to face this, but I feel like, middle schoolers, they need to learn that, like, there are certain things out there that are going to be a little bit more pushing the line and more horrific, and they need to know that, like, their fears aren't just, that their fears are a little imaginary. You know what I mean? Like, the true horrors aren't the monsters and the things that we think of and the things that go bump in the night and under your bed. It's actually like all these other things, and it helps to cope with this stuff. And I feel like that's why I like this idea of making this movie that I think honestly is made for like this group of people who, it's not very young kids, but I mean kids from, I would say, maybe like 8 to, like preteen, like, and even into teenage years. It's like it's them taking their first steps into this world of like, oh yeah, like we don't have to be scared of the monsters because the monsters aren't these aren't real things. These aren't things that actually exist. The monsters are the people who are, like the cop who's like, who's using a racial slur against this poor Mexican kid who's just trying to, live because he's being told he has to go die in war. And then literally Nixon is this looming monster who's just won or is about to win his turn. We know that he's going to win, and we know what kind of person he is, and that's what the true monster is, not these people who are, or these things that are coming from this book. One thing that I wouldn't recommend, because in 2019 a documentary was made about the book series titled Scary Stories, and it explores the process of the book's creation, including the artwork and folkloric exploration of the stories, their legacy, and the controversy surrounding attempts to ban them. It featured an interview from the family members of Alvin Schwartz, because he unfortunately has passed away, as well as R.L. Stine and several other authors of the 80s and 90s. I've seen it, and it's pretty good. I think it's a pretty good little documentary about the series, because it does have an impact on culture, on pop culture. I mean, you can ask literally anybody from the 80s, 90s, 2000s, up until now. Like, do you know what scary stories to tell in the dark? And they'll say yes, and they immediately picture in their mind, these pictures that are so iconic. Like, and now, because I don't want to make this episode too long or too short, but I did feel like we should go over some of the stories from the books. So I do want to read 3 stories from Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. The first one I want to start with comes from the 3rd book, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, More Tales to Chill Your Bones. This one is called Harold. When it got hot in the valley, Thomas and Alfred drove their cows up a cool green pasture in the mountains to graze. Usually they stayed there with the cows for 2 months. Then they brought them down to the valley again. The work was easy enough, but oh, it was boring. All day the 2 men tended their cows. At night they went back to the tiny hut where they lived. They ate supper and worked in the garden and went to sleep. It was always the same. Then Thomas had an idea that changed everything. "Let's make a doll the size of a man," he said. "It'd be fun to make, and we could put it in the garden to scare the birds." "It should look like Harold," Alfred said. Harold was a farmer they both hated. They made a doll out of old sacks stuffed with straw. They gave it a pointy nose like Harold's and tiny eyes like his. Then they added dark hair and twisted frown. Of course they gave it Harold's name. Each morning on their way to the pasture, they tied Harold to a pole in the garden to scare away the birds. Each night they brought him inside so that he wouldn't get ruined if it rained. When they were feeling playful, they would talk to him. One of them might say, "How are the vegetables growing today, Harold?" Then the other, making believe he was Harold, would answer in a crazy voice, "Very slowly." They both would laugh, but not Harold. Whenever something went wrong, they took it out on Harold. They would curse at him, even kick or punch him. Sometimes one of them would take the food they were eating, which they were both sick of, and smear it on the doll's face. "How do you like that stew, Harold?" he would ask. "Well, you better eat it or else." Then the 2 men would howl with laughter. One night, after Thomas had wiped Harold's face with food, Harold grunted. "Did you hear that?" Alfred asked. "It was Harold." Thomas said, "I was watching him when it happened. I can't believe it." "How could he grunt? He's just a sack of straw. That's not possible." "Throw him in the fire," Thomas said. "That will be that." "Let's not do anything stupid," said Alfred. "We don't know what's going on, and when we move the cows down, we'll leave them behind. For now, let's just keep an eye on them." So they left Harold sitting in the corner of the hut. They didn't talk to him or take him outside anymore. Now and then the doll grunted, but that was all. After a few days, they decided there was nothing to be afraid of. Maybe a mouse or some insect had gotten inside Harold and were making these sounds. So Thomas and Alfred went back to their old ways. Each morning they put Harold out in the garden, and each night they brought him back into the hut. When they felt playful, they joked with him. When they felt mean, they treated him as badly as ever. Then one night, Alfred noticed something that frightened him. "Harold is growing," he said. "I was thinking the same thing," Thomas said. "Maybe it's just our imagination," Alfred replied. We have been up here in this mountain for too long." The next morning, while they were eating, Harold stood up and walked out of the hut. He climbed on the roof and trotted back and forth like a horse on its hind legs. All day and all night, he trotted like that. In the morning, Harold climbed down and stood in a far corner of the pasture. The men had no idea what he would do next. They were afraid. They decided to take the cows down into the valley the same day. When they left, Harold was nowhere in sight. They felt as if they had escaped a great danger and began joking and singing. But when they had gone only a mile or two, they realized they had forgotten to bring the milking stools. Neither one wanted to go back for them, but the stools would cost a lot to replace. There really is nothing to be afraid of, they told one another. After all, what could a doll do? They drew straws to see who would go. It was Thomas. I'll catch up with you, he said, and Alfred walked toward the valley. When Alfred came to a rise in the path, he looked back for Thomas. He did not see him anywhere, but he did see Harold. The doll was on the roof of the hut again. As Alfred watched, Harold kneeled and stretched out a bloody skin to dry in the sun. The next story is called The Dead Hand. The village huddled on the edge of a vast swamp. As far as one could see, there were soggy meadows, holes filled with black water, and glistening sheets of wet, spongy peat. Skeletons of giant trees, snags, the people called them, rose out of the muck, their dead branches reaching out like long, twisted arms. During the day, the men in the village cut the peat and hauled it home to dry and sell for fuel. But when the sun went down and the wind, sighing and moaning, came in from the sea, the men were quick to leave. Strange creatures took over the swamp at night, and some even came into the village. That's what everyone said. People were so afraid they would not go out alone after dark. Young Tom Patterson was the only person in the village who did not believe in these creatures. On his way home from work, he'd whisper to his friends, "There's one!" And they would jump and run, and Tom would laugh and laugh. Finally, some of his friends turned to him. "If you know so much, go back to the swamps at night and see what comes of it." "I'll do it," Tom said. "I work out there every day, and not once have I ever seen anything that frightened me. Why should it be different at night? Tomorrow night, I'll take my lantern and walk out into the willow snag. If I get scared and run, I'll never make fun of you again." The next night, the men went to Tom Patterson's house to see him on his way. Thick clouds covered the moon. It was the blackest of nights. When they arrived, Tom's mother was pleading with him not to go. "I'll be all right," he said. "Nothing to be afraid of. Don't be foolish like the rest." He took his lantern and, seeing himself, headed down the spongy path toward the willow snag. Some of the young men wondered if Tom was right. Maybe they were afraid of things that did not exist. A few decided to follow him and see for themselves, but they stayed far behind in case he ran into trouble. They were sure they saw dark shapes moving about, but Tom's lantern kept bobbing up and down, and Tom's sound kept floating back to them, and nothing happened. Finally, they caught sight of the willow snag. There was Tom standing in a circle of light, looking this way and back. All of a sudden, the wind blew out his lantern, and Tom stopped singing. The men stood stuck still in the blackness, waiting for something awful to happen. The clouds shifted, and the moon came out. There was Tom again, only now he had his back pushed up against the willow snag, and he had his arms out in front of him, as if he were fighting something off. From where the men stood, it looked like dark shapes were swirling in around him. Then the clouds covered the moon again. Once more it was black as pitch. When the moon came out again, Tom was hanging on the willow snag with one arm. His other arm was stretched out in front of him, as if something was pulling it. It looked to the men as if a rotting, molding hand with no arm, a dead hand, had grabbed Tom's hand with one final wrench. Whatever had hold of Tom jerked him into the muck. That's what the men said. When the clouds blotted out the moon once more, the men turned and ran through the blackness toward the village. Again and again they lost the path, fell into the muck and water holes. In the end they crawled back on their hands and knees, but Tom Patterson was not with them. In the morning, people searched everywhere for Tom. Finally, they gave him up for lost. A few weeks later, toward the evening, the villagers heard a cry. It was Tom's mother. She was rushing down the path from the swamp, shouting and waving. She was sure the villagers had spotted her. She turned and ran back. Off they went after her. They found Tom Patterson by the willow snag, groaning and gibbering as if he had lost his mind. He kept pointing with one hand at something only he could see. Where his other hand should have been, there was nothing but a ragged stump oozing blood. The hand had been ripped clean off. Everybody said it was the dead hand that had done it. But no one really knows. Nobody will ever know, except Tom Patterson. He never spoke another word again. Our last tale is called The Drum. Once there were two children. Dolores was 7 and Sandra was 5. They lived in a small house in the country with their mother and a baby brother, Arthur. Their father was a seaman, and he was away on a long voyage. One day, Dolores and Sandra were running across a field near their house when they met a gypsy girl playing a drum. Her family was camping in the field for a few days. As the girl played, a little mechanical man and woman came out of the drum and danced. Dolores and Sandra had never seen such a drum, and they begged the girl to give it to them. She looked at them and laughed. "I'll give it to you," she said, "but only if you are really bad. Come back tomorrow and tell me how bad you were, and I will see." As soon as the two sisters got home, they started shouting, which was against the rules in their house. Then they wrote all over the walls with their crayons. At supper, they spilled their food, and when it was time for bed, they wouldn't go. They did everything they could to think of to upset their mother. They were really bad. Early the next morning, they hurried off to find the gypsy girl. "We were really bad yesterday," they told her, "so please give us a drum." But when they had told her what they had done, the gypsy girl laughed. "Oh, you must be much worse than that, if I am to give you the drum," she said. As soon as Dolores and Sandra got home, they pulled up all the flowers in the garden. They let the pig out and chased it away. They tore their clothes, they sloshed in the mud. They were a lot worse than the day before. "If you do not stop," their mother said, "I will go away and take Arthur with me. You will get a new mother with glass eyes and a wooden tail." That scared Dolores and Sandra. They loved their mother. They loved Arthur. They could not imagine being without them, and they began to cry. "I don't want to leave you," their mother said, "but unless you change your behavior, I will have to leave you." "We'll be good," the girls promised, yet they did not really believe that their mother would go away. "She's just trying to scare us," Dolores said. "We'll get the drum tomorrow," said Sandra, "then we'll be good again." Early the next morning, they rushed off to find the gypsy girl. When they found her, she was playing with the drum again. The little man and the woman were dancing. They told the gypsy girl how bad they had been the day before. "That must be bad enough to get the drum," they said. "Oh no," the gypsy girl said. "You must be much worse than that." "But we promised our mother we would be good from now on," said the girls. "If you really want the drum," the gypsy girl said, "you must be much worse." "It's only for one more day," Dolores told Sandra. "Then we will have the drum." "I hope you're right," Sandra said. As soon as they got home, they beat the dog with a stick. They broke the dishes. They tore their clothes to pieces. They spanked their baby brother Arthur. Their mother began to cry. "You're not keeping your promise," she said. "We will be good," said Dolores. "We promise," said Sandra. "I can't wait much longer," said their mother. "Please try." Early the next morning, before their mother was awake, Dolores and Sandra ran to see the gypsy girl. They told her all about the bad things that they had done the day before. "We were horrid," said Sandra. "We were worse than we've ever been," said Dolores. "Can we have the drum now, please?" "No," said the gypsy girl. "I never meant to give it to you. It was just a game we were playing. I thought you knew that." Dolores and Sandra began to cry. They rushed home quickly as they could. but their mother and Arthur were gone. They're out shopping, said Dolores. They'll be back soon. But they were still not back when the time for lunch came. Dolores and Sandra felt lonely and scared. They wandered through the fields the rest of the day. Maybe they will be home when we get back, said Dolores. When they got home, they saw through the window. The lamps were lit, and there was a fire in the fireplace. But they did not see their mother and Arthur. Instead, there was a new mother, her glass eyes glistening, her wooden tail thumping on the floor. So hopefully you liked this episode. That does it for now. Listen to the next episode. I'm gonna kind of try to switch it up. I'm gonna kind of do like a news episode with maybe some scary stories thrown in there, some other scary like stuff thrown like kind of in there, and then the episode after that will be another review. I'm gonna try and get a couple of these out in time for Halloween, so listen out for those. You know, I'm gonna be on iTunes. I'm gonna be on Spotify. I'll be on Beansprout, Buzzsprout. I'm going to be on a bunch of, like, Google Play, a bunch of different things. You can listen to the podcast. It's out from the Horrorbox. You know, follow, subscribe, like, leave comments. Yeah, just let me know if you like this or not. If you want me to keep going, if there's anything in particular you want me to review or you want me to go over, you know, you can always hit me up on Instagram. It's at Horrorbox Podcast. We're kind of a little bit rebranded on there. I'm going to try and update it as much as I can. I know I've been slacking because it's just social media is not my forte. You can also send us a message through email, horrorboxpodcast@gmail.com. You know, let me know. Like, is there anything that you want to share with me? Is there anything you want me to review in the future? Do you have a story you want to tell? I'd love to hear it. Is there anything scary you want me to point out? I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, coming up. So go on there. Let me know. DM me through Instagram. I'm always up to reading anything that you guys send. Yeah. So until next time. And we'll see what comes out of the horror.